Hello and welcome to another episode of Grammar and Thongs, where today we're going to be talking about oxymorons and paradoxes and the difference between the two, because they are quite similar and it can be confusing. First of all, a paradox is a statement that seems self-contradictory. It seems to contradict itself, or it just seems plain silly on the face of it. But actually, if you read it and sit with it and think about it for a little while, it includes a hidden truth. The origin of the word paradox comes from the Greek word paradoxon, which means contrary to existing beliefs or expectations. So it's not what you expect when you first read it. You need to sit there and think about that hidden truth. And the reason we use a paradox, or writers use paradoxes, is to make us think differently about an idea. Perhaps make us look at an idea in a different way, or to make us think more deeply about something. Or it can also just be for the fun of writing a paradox and having us think about it. Examples of paradoxes are these here. What a pity that youth must be wasted on the young. This was George Bernard Shaw, the Irish playwright. And on the face of it, it sounds silly. Who else would youth be wasted on but the young? Only the young can have youth. But the point that he's making, the idea that he's trying to get us to think about, is that when we're young, we don't necessarily appreciate how wonderful it is to be young, all of the advantages of that, the way that we bounce back physically from accidents and everything else associated with being young. Whereas when we're older and we've lived for longer and we're starting to experience some of the things that happen to the physical body as you get older, then you appreciate how good it was when you were young. So that's the big idea wrapped up in that paradox. And then this next one is from Animal Farm by George Orwell, where the pigs on the farm state that all animals are created equal, but some are more equal than others. Again, on the face of it, it doesn't seem to make sense. But it is expressing an idea, and that idea is that even though you might have a system of government, like communism, that states officially all animals are created equal, and that's the official line, then the reality, when you bring into it human frailty and the human condition, the reality is that some animals are going to be more equal than others, as in they're going to get more of the goods and services and more of the money that's going around because of corruption and all of the failings that we have as human beings. So all animals are created equal, yes, but really some animals are more equal than others. That's the paradox. Okay, an oxymoron, is a figure of speech. And it's where you take two opposite terms or two opposite words and you intentionally put them together to make a point. Okay, so it's very similar to a paradox, but we'll get to the difference in a minute. The origin of the word oxymoron is also from the Greek. It's from these two words, oskos and moros. And oskos actually means sharp, whereas moros means dull or foolish. So you get this sort of oxymoron, which literally translated is sharp dull. So the word oxymoron is in itself an oxymoron, which is quite nice. So an example of oxymoron is something like, it was a dark day. So day is generally associated with light, but if it was a dark day, we've got an oxymoron there. She had a sad smile. He was an honest thief. So yes, he was a thief, but he had a certain code that he followed. So he was an honest thief. His joke was met with deafening silence, to exaggerate this idea that sometimes silence can feel louder than the biggest crash because you're very aware of it. So you can see that the purpose of an oxymoron is very similar to the purpose of a paradox. It makes us think differently about an idea, or it emphasises a point. And it can also just be fun, often used for humour in puns, oxymoron. And lastly, in COVID times, you might have heard that we must be alone together. So on the face of it, these two words don't seem to go together, But it's this idea that, yes, we have to socially distance and be apart, maybe in our own homes, but through Zoom and other connections, we're trying to stay together. So we're alone together. What's the difference between these two? Well, I'm going to talk to you about that now. Okay, so what's the difference between an oxymoron and a paradox? The way to get your head around this is to remember that a paradox expresses an idea, the big idea, the underlying idea of the statement, whereas an oxymoron is the actual language device, the technique, the figure of speech. So I'll explain by giving you another example. This little phrase, sweet sorrow, okay, it comes from Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare, and it's that moment when Juliet is saying goodbye to Romeo as he disappears into the night. And she says, parting is such sweet sorrow. These two things seem to contradict each other. Okay, when we think of sorrow, as in feeling very sad about something, it would be more appropriate to talk about that as a bitter thing, not a sweet thing. Bitter is the opposite of sweet. So, what does she mean by saying parting is such sweet sorrow? Well, she's expressing these ideas that are hard to sum up. Deep ideas that when you're leaving someone that you love, you will feel the pain of separation. But that pain of separation can actually remind you of the joy that you feel when you're with that loved one. Okay, it's through that pain that we're reminded of that love, the fact that we actually have someone that we love. So it's this idea that love can bring both joy and pain. It's also that anticipation that you feel. Yes, you're leaving your loved one, but you're anticipating seeing them again. So you're sorry that you're leaving, but you are feeling joy at the idea that you may see them again. So these are the big ideas being expressed by this oxymoron. So I guess the way to think of it is that an oxymoron is a figure of speech that expresses a paradox, a paradoxical idea. Okay? So this oxymoron is a figure of speech that expresses this or these paradoxical ideas. Okay, thank you.